o'clock, so I'm going to turn it over to Rita to introduce our next session speakers.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Hope you had a great lunch. It's my honor to introduce Josh Kapoor. Josh brings over 15 years of professional communications experience to Corning Place Communications. Prior to joining Corning, Josh worked for the New York State Dental Association as their assistant executive director. In that role, he oversaw communications and marketing efforts for the 13,000 member professional association. Prior to that, he spent 8 years coordinating media relations and public affairs for Harvard University. Josh holds a bachelor's degree in English literature from Elmira College and a Master of Liberal Arts in Expression Studies degree in journalism from Harvard University. He's a member of the Public Relations Society of America, and obviously SA, and the Albany Bond. So please welcome Josh. Would you like me to also introduce Charisse now, or after?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And also from the same company, Corning Place Communications, I'm happy to introduce Charisse Wells. Charisse has served as the Deputy Press Secretary for 2 years under Governor Cuomo. Prior to that, she served as the Deputy Press Secretary for the Empire State Development, which is the state's chief economic development agency. She previously worked as a communications and web strategies manager for the Rensselaer County Regional Chamber, where she oversaw marketing, social media, and other communication efforts. Charisse is an active member also of the Public Relations Society of America and the Women's Press Club of New York State. So welcome, Josh and Charisse.
Thank you, Rita. That's a really kind introduction. It's funny when you speak of these things, you hear these introductions. In some ways, I just recently had a milestone birthday, and it makes me feel old.
Aww.
Like,
so did I.
But anyway, that is very kind, and I think you covered all the bases. I will add just a couple other little things. So because we're all association people in one way or another, Charisse and I both hold accreditation in public relations, our APR credential. It's PRSA's credential, similar to the Certified Association Executive. And we place a lot of value in that. And obviously we place a lot of value in associations. So we think that that's an important thing for members of our association and any association who work in PR to pursue. Another thing you'll probably notice on the title slide is our logo has a 20 next to it, CPC 20. The reason for that is we talk about milestones. I turned 40 this year, Charisse turned 30. This is Corning Place's 20th anniversary of existence. We were founded 20 years ago by our parent company, who some of you might be familiar with, Hinman Straub. They're a law firm and a lobbying firm in Albany. And they had the foresight and wisdom to establish an internal public relations, public affairs firm because they recognized 2 decades ago the value and importance that having a good public affairs campaign means to a good advocacy campaign. So that's a little bit about why our logo is slightly different there. I think I know quite a few of you who I've met over the years, but for those of you who I don't know and who I haven't met, Corning Place Communications is a small public affairs agency, as I mentioned, based in Albany, been around for 20 years. We work with a variety of clients, both associations, not-for-profits, for-profit organizations across a variety of industries. And we run public affairs campaigns that complement their advocacy efforts, whether they have an internal government relations team or they use an external lobbying firm, or sometimes both. And we work with lobbying firms across town. We've worked with pretty much everyone. We're not just part of Hinman Straub. We share clients that have different lobbyists, and we work very closely with agencies all around town. Is there anything, Charisse, you'd want to add to that?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
We're a stone's throw from the Capitol, so it makes our advocacy efforts a little bit easier because of our location, but yeah.
Yeah, and actually, we also work very closely with other marketing firms around town. You guys heard from Paul Fahey earlier today, who we really like and respect over at. They do great work, and we've done some projects with them. So I thought his presentation was fantastic. And actually, there's a couple of things we're going to talk about today that will probably touch on some of the points that he made. One other thing, typically when we do these presentations in person, they're pretty interactive. So if anybody has questions today, please feel free to jump in. You can either unmute yourself and ask, or you can use the chat box, and Vanessa's going to monitor that. And there actually will be a couple of times where we ask you questions, and we hope that you're able to answer, because we think that these presentations go much better when they're interactive rather than us just lecturing for 30 or 45 minutes. So I encourage everybody to make this as participatory as possible. So let's dive right in. So social media and modern day advocacy. Before we can talk about modern advocacy, I think it's important to talk about traditional advocacy. And what we mean when we say that is that, traditionally, and I'm talking going back maybe 50 years, organizations and associations would band together, and the way that they would conduct their advocacy is they would hire a lobbyist, right? I imagine almost every one of you on this video conference has a lobbyist or a government relations person who really leads your advocacy efforts. Traditionally, the way it would work is you'd have this lobbyist, and a couple of times a year, you would come to Albany. You would meet with your legislators. You would talk to them about your issues. Maybe you would have a infographic, like a one-pager, a leave behind, and that would really be it. And then throughout the year, the ongoing communication would be, your lobbyist or your government relations person would maybe provide an update monthly on your board calls about what's going on in Albany. Generally, it was a lot of your bill's in committee, your bill's going to move, get a vote in committee coming up, then it's going to move to this next committee, then it'll go to a full floor vote. I mean, you're all familiar with the advocacy process and how it works. And, while that process has largely stayed the same, there's still a need for it. And obviously that hasn't gone away. A lot of the work is still face-to-face. Although with our current situation where nobody's left inside the Capitol, things are changing really, really quickly. Just out of curiosity, how many of you folks have had to cancel a lobby day or change your plans because now you can't get in to see your legislators? Oh, I see a hand there. And just out of curiosity, what have you done differently, or how have you changed your planning based on the what's going on right now with not being able to get in to see legislators or cancel a lobby day?
Oh wow, 2 lobby days canceled.
Wow. Yeah.
Electronic. I've been hearing a lot of that. Folks are setting up like Skype meetings or Zoom meetings, which sounds like they've been helpful and effective.
All right.
Virtual lobby day.
What's that, Vanessa?
Virtual lobby day using phone to action.
Okay, excellent. So some of the things we're going to talk about a little bit later, it seems like some of you are already doing. That's fantastic. So some of the downsides of traditional lobbying, in our opinion, is that and I think many of you would probably have found this to be the case also, is that you only get to see your legislator the day that you're there for that meeting, right? So, and a lot of times you don't even get to see your legislator. You're going to be meeting with a staff person because they're out at a committee meeting. And on top of that, you are one of, and I jokingly say 500 other people going through his or her office that day. But it is true. If you go over to the LOB on any Tuesday or Wednesday during the session, and you just stand outside a legislator's office, it's just nonstop groups moving through their office in 10 and 15-minute increments. And I don't know about you, but that's kind of, to borrow an old term, drinking from a fire hose, right? Like, how could they possibly remember your issue based on that 10 or 15-minute meeting when, there's 8 groups, leading right behind you? So other drawbacks. So I've heard this term before, and from lobbyists and other legislators, that every year there's about 10,000 bills that move through the New York State Legislature. I think that that's an average over a couple of year time span. Last year it seems like they had about 100,000 bills. I feel like they passed everything under the sun last year, and I was curious what they were going to deal with this year. But what we always say is one of the drawbacks to that is every single person on this call represents an organization who has issues, very important issues to their members, and they're trying to figure out ways to get their particular issues heard. One of the downsides is because there are so many different messages, how do you get yours to stand out? Because really, when you follow the course of the legislature, there's only going to be about 10 or 15 bills that get really serious attention and debate. The ones that you'll see being talked about on shows like Capitol Press Room or Capitol Tonight, the ones that really bubble up. I think last year, if you look at the session, bail reform was one of those issues. Healthcare is, usually one of those issues. Really, you can boil each session down to about a handful, a dozen or so issues that are really, really super important in terms of the public dialogue. So the question is, how do you get your message? How do you raise it up above that that huge kind of mess of different messages? And that's one of the challenges of the traditional lobbying, is that you're there so infrequently. How do you get your issue to be one of the issues that's talked about? So the evolution of the traditional public advocacy campaign, I say that, Corning Place came about 20 years ago, and our lobbyists figured out traditional lobbying alone wasn't enough, right? They were talking to legislators, they were bringing their clients to meet with the legislators, but the legislators were saying back to them, that's great, but I'm not really feeling like this is an issue that's important to my constituents. It's not that, it doesn't seem to be an issue that's raising up in the public dialogue. So it happened earlier than the 90s, but really in the 80s and 90s, this kind of took off. The PR component became increasingly important. So when I say that, I'm really talking about earned media. Articles in your newspaper, news segments on television and radio, op-eds, letters to the editor. How many of you out there, I can see some of you, so a show of hands, have a PR component or communications or public affairs component to your advocacy campaigns? Yeah, I see a lot of hands going up. Yeah, of course. So the reason you need that is because, like I was saying, the legislators were telling our lobbyists and the government relations folks that until our constituents tell us there's a need for this, we're really, we don't feel compelled to act on this quite as urgently as you're pushing us to. I think Charisse could offer an interesting perspective on this, having, without divulging too much, but having worked in the governor's office, she might be able to offer a little insight into some of the things that moved the governor and his inner staff on this.
Yeah, and I do have to apologize before I start talking some more. I do have terrible sinuses or a bad spring cold right now, so hopefully you can understand me okay. But yeah, I mean, during my time in the governor's press office, the opinion pieces, the letters to the editor, those are followed very closely. And there's kind of like a top 6 or 8 papers that the entire press office, both in the city and based in Albany, follow regularly every day. I mean, they're checking the papers and the websites at 4 or 5 a.m. And that's Newsday, the Post, Times, Wall Street Journal, Buffalo News, Post Standard in Syracuse, and the Albany Citizen in Central New York. That's actually one that they follow regularly in the Times Union in Albany. And there's others too, the hyper-local papers. They genuinely take the time to read through what the headlines are, what the stories are about, and who's submitting the opinion pieces. The value is definitely there, and that's why it's still an important piece of advocacy campaigns today.
Yeah, I think back to a campaign we ran a couple of years ago, and we still have this client today. The Children's Aid Society of New York hired us to run a campaign to get money in the state budget for foster youth to attend college. It was called the Fostering Youth Success Alliance. And I remember there was this first year we were trying to get $4 million for a couple hundred foster youth to attend college, and we were really struggling breaking through. As usual, there were budget deficits. They were looking for cutbacks. They had the 2% tax cap on all the agencies. And really everybody was fighting for money. And again, this is no surprise to all of you. I'm sure every one of you have been in a budget fight trying to get money out of the state budget. What really made the difference, and we heard this from legislators, was we were able to get former Chief Justice Judith Kaye of the New York State Court of Appeals to write an op-ed that was published in Newsday. The New York Times passed on it. I think they regretted that after it ran in Newsday, advocating for foster youth to be able to attend college. And that was a real turning point. And so, for those of you who, think that the earned media component and the PR component of this has totally gone away, I assure you it's there. But it's slowly losing it's becoming increasingly harder. And the reason it's becoming increasingly harder is that newsrooms are shrinking. That's no surprise to anybody. Papers are closing. So there's fewer reporters covering these issues, and there's even more competition to get your stories out there into play. But there really is still a component for that. So the reason I set all that up for you is if traditional advocacy and lobbying is still a thing, but it's not as powerful as it once was, and if earned media and public relations is still around, but again, it's not as powerful as it once was, everybody is asking the question, where do we go from here? So it's our belief that modern advocacy campaigns are blended campaigns. They will incorporate both your traditional lobbying, they will incorporate your public relations, but then they also increasingly absolutely have to incorporate social media. And that's where we're going to go from here. How to use social media effectively as a communications vehicle in your advocacy campaign. So using social media for advocacy. So when we talk about social media, it's really kind of an all-encompassing term. We're not just talking about one tool. We're really talking about all of the digital tools that you have at your discretion to contact, inform, and mobilize a group around a cause. Really, the purpose of your social media and digital media advocacy is going to be used in a couple of different ways. One, I think, is to show constituent support. So many of your organizations are going to be individual member organizations, right? So you have, for instance, as was referenced by Rita earlier, I worked for the New York State Dental Association. We had 13,000 individual dentists across New York State. So when we were trying to pass a bill, one of the things we would try to do is mobilize as many of our dentists as possible to use their social media accounts and inform their legislators that they are, to support a particular bill. Other organizations might have a slightly different model where you represent institutions, for example. I'm going to reference one of my clients who you'll see later in the presentation, the Association of Proprietary Colleges, and I assume many of you probably know the CEO there, President Donna Stelling-Gurnett. She's been very involved with SA for a long time. That's an association of 12 member institutions. So you'll see later how we activate them and engage their students around advocacy. And it is a little bit of a challenge because you have, the college that's really the primary member, and the students may not necessarily know what individually they're involved with, but you can develop a campaign so that they're actually engaged and active in a useful way for even organizational type membership associations. All right. So let's talk about some of the digital tools that are out there. And I'm gonna have some questions for some of you about what folks are using for your tools. Now, obviously, again, we're making this all encompassing when we say the term digital. So like websites and blogs might seem a little, passe, but actually people are finding that the use of them is evolving. Facebook and Twitter, also very important. Normally when we do these sessions, I like to ask how many people in the group, and again, I can see quite a few of you, not everybody, how many of you have Facebook accounts? All right, so I see, let me scroll through some of the photos so I can see who else. Yeah, pretty much everybody. How about, how many of you have Twitter accounts? Okay, all right, still quite a few hands. This is a pretty good group. How about Instagram? All right, we're seeing a few less hands this time. And then what about Snapchat? Uh-oh, that's very few hands.
How about TikTok?
Okay, there you go. How about TikTok? Oh, Vanessa is on everything. We love it. So this really is interesting. It just kind of, and there's other platforms that we're not even referencing here, TikTok being one of the newer ones. But the reason we bring this up is to show you there are a lot of different ways to reach your audiences. And so those are all things that you have all personally, and you can think about this individually. You don't have to engage unless you want to share a story. But thinking about which tools make sense, which platforms make sense for your membership association, I think is really important. I'll give you a quick example. So when I was at the Dental Association, we primarily used Facebook and Twitter because, as you can imagine, our membership tended to skew a little bit older. However, one of the groups that we were most focused on engaging were young dentists and newer dentists. Any of you who, have individual membership associations like that, who are focused on recruiting and retaining younger members, one of the things our new dentist committee, so that was any dentist in their first 10 years of practice, would tell us is that we don't really use Facebook and Twitter. We're really using Instagram more. And even a couple of them were saying, actually, we're using Pinterest, right? Which I thought was kind of interesting, and I had no experience with. I had to ask my wife about Pinterest. But it really forced us to think about, okay, who are all of our audiences, and how do they want to be communicated with? I'll give you a slightly different example. So I referenced my wife before. She's a high school counselor. And as you know, all the schools are closed right now. And one of the challenges they're facing is working with their students. I don't know how many of you on this video conference have high school age students, but you probably know email is not their primary means of communication. So when you're emailing students at that age group, they're probably not checking their email very frequently. And if they're getting back to you a week or 2 weeks later, it's probably not so much because they're ignoring you. It's just that that's just not how they communicate. So when you're thinking about your various audiences, think about the tools that make sense for reaching them. And later on, we're going to talk about metrics. But one of the things I think you have to do when you're setting out with your objectives and goals for your campaign is also thinking about your metrics, right? Like, where are you sending people? What are you asking them to do, and how are you tracking that? Sharice, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Not on this slide. When we talk about the tracking it, though, got a couple things.
All right, great. So a lot of people will say, Josh, when should I use social media in my advocacy campaign? And that's a really good question. A lot of people will say, well, I have a lobby day coming up, So, you know, we're pretty media savvy. What we're going to do is we're just going to have everybody on the lobby day, you know, take photos and tweet at our legislators, and you know, that'll be enough. But really what we're saying is that you've got to think of this as an ongoing campaign. Much like meeting with your legislators one-on-one that particular day, that's great, and it's really good to meet with them. But the whole point of using social media in your advocacy campaigns is to make it an ongoing conversation. How many of you out there, and I'm going to scroll through so I can see hands, how many of you currently follow the legislators who are on the committees that you are most, you know, your legislation most goes through? How many of you are following your legislators? Just to show.
Especially on Twitter.
Yeah, especially on Twitter. I am not seeing many hands. So interestingly, one thing we do, and we found it to be incredibly useful. First of all, it's like a little did you know? Did you know that about 98% of the legislature is on Twitter, and I would say probably about 80% uses it actively.
Literally walking through the halls like this.
Yeah, there are only a handful of legislators who don't have Twitter accounts, and for some reason, I don't know why, but Twitter has become the tool of choice for the legislators, more so than Facebook, more so than Instagram. That is really the tool they use. My suspicion is, and Sharice may feel differently having been on the inside, my suspicion is it's the tool of choice for the news media. All of the legislative correspondents use Twitter as their primary means of communicating. And I think, you know, it's kind of like the reason the sharks came back to Cape Cod. First the seals came, and then the sharks followed. The reporters are on Twitter, and the legislators followed.
I completely agree, Josh.
So, and for any of you who go to Cape Cod, that probably resonates with you. I see Brian laughing, so maybe he's seen some shark fins swimming around Nauset Beach. So anyway, we're going to talk a lot about Twitter, but don't think that means that we're not actually also focused on the other tools, because you know, you're probably thinking like I was at the Dental Association, Josh, my members skew a little bit older. Really the way we communicate with them is Facebook. So think about the tools that make most sense, both for engaging with your legislators one-on-one, but also engaging with your membership too, because that's one of the other issues. You have to activate your membership to do something. So really, you really have to just take those things into consideration. All right, so this slide is very important because the idea of social media as a tool is something you have to do on an ongoing basis, right? So it can't just be the day of your lobby day, or it really shouldn't even be the week leading up to your lobby day. It should be a tool that you're using on a regular ongoing basis. And we're going to provide you with a couple of sample calendars later in the presentation that'll show you the way that we lay it out. And it also helps you stick to the plan. I'm going to use a saying that one of my clients uses, and I think it's really good. She says, plan the work and work the plan. And we're gonna talk about why that's so important and how a calendar really helps you out. So you really need to think about the fact that social media is 24/7. I'll use one senator, for example, and you can go to his Twitter handle right now and see this. He's fairly new, Senator Andrew Gennardis from Brooklyn. And every Friday, he puts out a tweet to everybody following him saying, all right, what are your issues? What are the things that you want me to focus on this week? And it gives you a free-for-all, a chance to, you know, write back to him and say, well, these are the issues that are important to me. And if you follow some of the threads, he actually responds and engages with his constituents and with whomever is tweeting at him. You'll probably notice that if you start following the legislature, and we could share those handles with you. We've gathered them as a benefit to our client, but we could share all of those with you to make the work a little bit easier. But if you start following these folks, you'll notice that they're engaging with their constituents, the other members, the media in real time. I mean, I've sat in the Senate gallery and I've watched, you know, Senator Ramos tweeting about what's going on and people responding and her tweeting right back. So the nice thing about social media is it gives you a tool to engage with your legislators on issues that are important to you and important to them 24/7, 7 days a week. I mean, what else can you do with that? You can't call their office at 11 o'clock at night, but if you're watching, you know, Saturday Night Live on Saturday night and you see something funny that references New York, or if you're watching the presidential primary debates and you see something about healthcare and that's important to your clients, that is the perfect time to engage with them. And what's the worst thing that happens? They don't see it, or they don't see it till later. That's fine. But it's a really, it's an ongoing conversation. And just as a quick aside, I would say that you should probably follow the media that you're interested in also. I would follow members of the media in the Legislative Correspondence Association, and anybody who might write about you, follow them, like their tweets, write back to them, engage with them, because that's a way of showing them that you're paying attention, so that when you come to them with an issue, they know you. You're a known quantity. You're not just, you know, some random person firing a shot in the dark.
And if I could add something, Josh, I know that not everyone is on Twitter, and it is all about like a layered and sustained message, both to your membership and to who you're advocating, whether it's locals or state. But sorry, I think we were getting some feedback there. I just wanted to say, like, if you don't have, say, a Twitter account right now, you can start one up. You can start from scratch and just start tweeting and sharing messages. You don't necessarily have to have something established. But if you're able to establish a following and establish a page where you've shared some social media messages before you start engaging with folks on a harder level, like tagging legislators and photos and things to get their attention, that's probably best case scenario. But I know obviously this year is a challenging year in terms of advocacy because we're all working remote now. But if you wanted to get on Twitter, you could just immediately jump in. And that's the great thing about social media is the growth in your social media accounts. It can happen quickly, it can happen slowly, but if you're getting the engagements, the retweets, the likes, and again, on Facebook and Instagram too, that's what counts because more people will see your content. So just like the headline says, wherever you are in your process, social media is important, and you can jump in and start at any time, or you can take your time and establish your account before you start engaging. I think both really are effective as long as your messages are consistent and you're going back to your goals.
There was a question in the chat. Would you recommend doing this from your personal Twitter or your organization's?
That's a really good question. I'll provide my answer, and I'll see maybe Sharice might have a different take on it. I think it's both. The way I would recommend that you try to maintain a tone for your organizational voice. So my hope would be that many of you in your roles with your organization, especially if you're an executive director, you have your organization's Twitter or Facebook, but then you also have your own personal. I would try to use both tools to amplify your message. And you can tweak the message a little bit, right? So I would say, for example, I'll use one of my other clients, for example. We represent the PBA of New York State, which is the union for SUNY police, park police, NCON officers, and forest rangers. So they have their own social media accounts, and it's PBA NYS. And a lot of times when we put out a message directly from the PBA, the tone will really be kind of organizational, right? But when we have our executive director tweet or post a Facebook message, it's more personalized to him because he's a former president of the Troopers PBA. He's a former state trooper. So he can say things that are different than the official PBA accounts can say. So the nice thing about using your own personal is that you can bring some of your personality into the story. I know when I was at the Dental Association, I was putting out social media from NISDA using kind of the official NISDA voice, but our executive director is a dentist, right? So he could say things as both a dentist and the head of the organization that bring his personality and personal experiences in. So I would say use both, but think about the different tone. You want to amplify the message, but come at it from different points of view.
And one thing I'd like to add is the importance of always being prepared for crisis too. And I know, again, like the situation we're in now is kind of a perfect example, but to be able to have a personal account, especially if you are an executive director of an organization and you would likely be the spokesperson in a crisis scenario, it's good to have an established account where you can have your personal tweets, whether it's a photo of your dog. I mean, people love that. It humanizes you, right? But you're also sharing content from your organization if that's the voice that you choose to have. But you've established an account where you can reach your constituents in a crisis situation, or be able to retweet, or if it's Facebook, share whatever message is coming from the organization, and vice versa. The organization can share what's being sent out from your personal account. So I think thinking in that way, it is important to have both of those accounts. But even in advocacy, like Josh said, what we've been talking about with these blended campaigns, it's good to have the layering to be able to send out a message, even if it's in two different ways, for multiple accounts.
Yeah, and one more point. So I mentioned one of our association clients that represents colleges. So the colleges all have their own official social media accounts, but I was advocating at a conference last summer for all of our college presidents to establish a social media presence also. Because again, the official organizational social media accounts are kind of impersonal, whereas when it's a real person, again, I know this sounds kind of redundant, but it personalizes it. See if I can use the word person one more time. It humanizes it, and I think people appreciate that. Generally, and I know people. You're not going to connect with a brand the same way you're going to connect with a person. And that's why brands have spokespeople. And I think for our organizations, people understand the brand, but the spokesperson is going to be either your president or your executive director. So I think you should do from both. And actually that kind of segues to our next slide. Who should be using social media for advocacy? I know that there is, again, I'll go back to personal experience. At the Dental Association, there's this huge internal debate about why we should not use our members in advocacy. And I thought that was a tremendous mistake. I thought it's a huge mistake not to be using your members, because legislators want to know that their constituents are concerned about this issue. They do support this issue. So I highly, highly recommend that every organization think of ways to activate their membership and get them involved in advocacy. I assume many of you already do. Is there anybody that wants to talk about how you use your members in advocacy, if you're using them on social media right now? Anybody? Okay.
And if not, we could probably give an example. I think the APC that you mentioned earlier, Josh, is a great example of that.
Yeah. So so again, APC, the Association of Proprietary Colleges, really the association is made up of the organizations, the individual colleges. And generally the students aren't that concerned about the issues that the association is advocating for. And there really hasn't, until recently, we haven't really engaged them, but we did finally, because we've been advocating for increases in TAP, the tuition assistance program. And one of the ways that we were able to do that, and it took a while, I think, for the college presidents to get on board with the idea of getting their students involved in the process. They would bring them up for student lobby day, but getting them activated on social media was kind of a different thing. So what we did with the groups is we explained to them, what Advocacy Day was about. In this, we had a boot camp the night before our lobby day and explained how it was all working. And actually in the weeks leading up to it, we asked each of the colleges to develop a video thanking the legislators for their continued support of TAP. And we started, as the videos came in from the colleges, we started tweeting them at the legislators to let them know, hey, Advocacy Day is coming up in a couple weeks. These students are going to be on your campus. Here's a video they made. Take a minute and look at it. And I'm just going to take a quick segue here for a second. Video and photos are so important. The level of engagement with any video or a photo is so much higher in social media than anything you post without video or still photos. So please, 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 whenever you're developing, your social media content, be sure to include photo and video. And if you're doing videos, keep them less than a minute. And most people are watching their videos on their phone on silence. So include the text, right? So make sure that you have the text of whatever somebody's saying in the bottom of the video. But anyway, so
Natasha has a great question. I think this would be a good point to address too.
Sure.
What if leaders use their personal accounts already and have possible controversial posts? And I'm going to use legislators as an example, actually, because a lot of them have personal accounts and then their New York State Senate or New York State Assembly account. And how I would recommend at least to address this, and Josh, feel free to jump in. It might be good to see what their bio says currently, because you can always write in there, it's personal account, tweets and replies and retweets are not endorsements. You'll see that a lot of that kind of language on people's personal accounts, but I think it would be worth establishing a organizational account for that person, whether it's like executive director of said organization and it's their headshot from the website and it's more official, just to differentiate. And that could help really make sure that like one is personal, one is your professional, and it might be worth just a conversation too, because that's why a lot of times you have your communications people or consultants to be able to help with those conversations, because not everyone thinks about things the same, and especially if they're newer to social media, they might not understand the spread of what they're sharing and how many people could actually see it, which is likely. So Josh, jump in.
Yeah, along those lines, when we're training our client, doing media training for our clients, the one thing we always tell them is nothing is ever off the record. Don't go off the record, right? I've seen people get burned so many times. And any of you out there who have had this happen, I'm sure I see a couple of smiles and giggles. Much the same way, if you're the head of an organization and you have a public profile, be prepared for whatever you say, even if you have that caveat that this is my own personal, it's not the organization. Be prepared for somebody to use that against you. My advice would be, if you want to say things that are controversial or could harm your organization, create another social media account. The kids these days are on Instagram, have their real Instagram account, which they call their Rinsta, and then they have their fake Instagram account, their Finsta, which they use to troll their friends and show stuff that their parents can't see. If you want to say controversial things or share, controversial memes, please, 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 I implore you, don't do it with your public social media. Develop an alternative one that kind of protects you from that, because whatever you say can be used against you, and probably will if somebody has an axe to grind.
And there's privacy settings for a reason. You could always implement those too. Yep.
So I usually like to pepper in a couple of stats here about who's using social media. So just, again, I don't think I need to convince any of you, but right now there's about 326 million active monthly Twitter users that develop about 500 million tweets a day. 74% of those folks say that's where they get their news. And one thing that's interesting too is, if you want to look at the group over 65, 46% of people over the age of 65 use Facebook daily, and 7% use Twitter daily. So just to give you a sense, and those numbers keep growing. Those are from Pew, and those are the most recent available, and they grow every year. So anybody, if you go back to your board and you talk about wanting to invest time or money into social media, and they say, well, that's just for kids. That's not true. There's a lot of good information out there about about who's using it. And all you have to do is follow some of your legislators to see how many people are using it actively. All right. So how do you use social media in an advocacy campaign? We always say you have, and usually in a lot of our presentations, we have this slide with a picture of Yogi Berra, the famous Yankee, and a quote from him saying, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. But we've been told that that's kind of a dated image, so we've moved on to something newer and jazzier. So we always advocate starting with goals and objectives, right? And I'm sure all of you feel the same way. What is it? You know, a lot of people just want to dive right in and start putting stuff out there because they feel they need to. But really, that you have to establish your objectives with your social media campaign. It's like anything else, right? You wouldn't start your year without your budget. Likewise, you really shouldn't be advocating any time towards social media if you're not setting out some goals and objectives for what you're trying to accomplish. They could be wide ranging, right? It could be about, you know, if you're with the American Red Cross, it could be about getting people to donate blood right now. If you were me at the Dental Association, it could be getting younger dentists to join the association and stay with them. For our purposes, it's going to be about advocacy, right? Your goals should be, how do I get my members to, you know, reach out to their legislators on social media and take a particular action? And I think the way you do that is you develop a plan, and we're going to show you a calendar in a minute, and you let your members know these are the issues. I'm sure you put out an advocacy memo at the beginning of the year. Add a social media component to it and say, these are the types of messages we want you to put out. Here's the list of all the Twitter handles for all of the members of the Education Committee or the Rules Committee or whatever committee is important to you. Follow them and start paying attention to what they're putting out. And then also occasionally, when we send you, you know, out information, these are some of the tweets we want you to put out. We find it's best to give about 3 different kind of generic sample tweets to your members, and then be pretty specific about what you want them to do. Last week, I developed a memo for that client, the PBA, who I was talking to you about. They were going to do a lobby day on St. Patrick's Day because they wanted the legislators to support the park police merger, but they obviously couldn't do that. At the last minute, they had to cancel the in-person lobby day. And so they went and they did a virtual lobby day, and they tweeted at all of their members. So we gave them 3 different tweets, and we gave them a hashtag to use. And we said, you know, spread these out throughout the day to different legislators. And that's going to be our legislative lobby day for this year in the coronavirus, you know, era. And it was pretty successful. We got pretty good levels of engagement. We had some retweets. We had some legislators DM their direct message their constituents asking for more information. So I think the key is figure out what you're hoping to accomplish. Say, you know, last year we had 20 members who participated in this advocacy day but on social media. This year we'd like to see 40 of our members involved, and then look at the metrics, right? See what type of engagement you're getting. How many likes, how many retweets, how many shares, whatever tool you're using. And as always, you know, we advocate for making sure your objectives are SMART. Everybody knows, you know, that acronym, so we won't get into that. But start off with objectives for sure. All right. So evaluation is going to be really important. You know, the part of the reason we're doing our asking for objectives is we want metrics. We want them to be measurable. I mean, there's no point in doing a social media campaign if it's not accomplishing anything. So when you're done with the legislative session, you want to be able to go back and look at your what you did and how effective it was, because then you can figure out, do we want to make changes? Is there something we would do differently? Charisse and my colleague Paul Larrabee ran a really, really good campaign last year for the Farm Bureau. And they really implemented all elements, both the earned media, they did the in-person advocacy day, but they did a lot of social media, and their metrics were off the charts. It was a coalition that didn't exist this time, last year, and within the span of 3 months, they branded it, they got a following, and they developed their social media, and their metrics were really strong.
Yeah, it worked out really well. We actually had like farm members join the coalition almost unsolicited. There was a space on our website, which was kind of like our main hub for the digital advocacy campaign, like Josh mentioned earlier. And it worked well. We got them engaged, and we were able to use the different tactics.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that this will teach you the first year you do it is, if you're seeing much more engagement on Facebook than you are on Twitter, then that's probably the tool you want to use. Or if you feel like, yeah, we got a lot of members engaged on Facebook, but it didn't do much from our advocacy point of view, we weren't seeing enough engagement from the legislators, then you might want to try and get your members transitioned over to Twitter, and then compare the results and see what happened there. All right. Uh-oh, we're getting low on time here. So that kind of leads to the next slide, determining your platforms. There are a lot of tools that you can use to monitor your social media, and I suspect some of you already use them, and I hope you're using them. Google Analytics, everybody should be monitoring what kind of traffic they're getting to the website, what's happening there. There's some third-party sites like Hootsuite that are really, really good. That we have a tool that we use that monitors social media called Critical Mention. That one you have to pay for. But the important thing is figuring out which channels work for you and your membership, tracking which ones are moving the needle, and then making sure if you don't have the tools that are helping you accomplish this, that you go get them. And as Sharice and I are happy to talk to you guys offline, if there's anything in particular you had questions about or that we could advise you on. But the key is, again, this is all about finding the platforms that work for you, tracking your metrics, and then adjusting accordingly.
And one other one I just want to add very quickly, but I'm sure you've all heard of it, is Bitly, because it's an easy way to track the number of clicks, and you can use Bitly to drive people to your website or wherever your main hub is. That's another easy one too.
That's a good point too. So for those of you who are using Twitter, and we highly advocate it, they upped the character count to 280 last year, but a lot of times you're trying to share URLs and they're really long. Bitly's a URL shortener. Google offers one too. That's a nice way to save characters. It's a good tool to use to get down to the word count or the character count you need to get your tweets in. So here's an example of a social media calendar, okay? So this is one we created for a client last year, and you'll probably recognize the gray days. Those are legislative days, those are lobby days. The white days are non-lobby days or non-legislative days, and then the blue days are special days for that client, right? There's a board meeting, it's their lobby day, so on and so forth. We find, and then all the little Twitter icons are for days that we're going to put out tweets. So we find having a calendar like this is really helpful. It keeps you honest, right? When I have that thing tacked to the corkboard above my desk, every day I sit down, and when it's Tuesday the 7th, and I'm looking at, Wednesday the 8th is the state of the state, and that's a day we have to put out a tweet, I know ahead of time, and I'm thinking about, okay, what am I going to be doing tomorrow? What am I planning for? And also, if I'm planning to activate my members, do I need to send an email out today that lets all of them know what we want them to be doing tomorrow? So we find these calendars are really helpful. It's funny, at first we thought they were kind of simplistic, but the clients seem to really like them. So I talked about APC before, and I'm going to give you a couple of examples here that you can see about what was successful. So if you look on the middle tweet on the 24th, we put out a tweet ahead of time saying we're coming to, and actually this wasn't us, this was one of our members saying, hey legislators, we're coming to town, be ready for us. We did things like that where we actually shared the video ahead of time so that when we got there, they would remember us. If you look on the 25th, the day of our lobby day, there's a Senator, Alessandra Biaggi, who actually unsolicited tweeted a photo out to our group, tagging us, thanking us for coming, and used hashtags and shared a photo of our members who had tweeted her the day before that they were going to be there in person. So that's kind of a nice example of teeing it up and then getting a legislator to do something that you want them to do. And then the beauty of it is you can continue the conversation after you're gone, right? Now she follows you. You can continue to engage with her and talk with her throughout the session. And as your lobbyist is sending you updates about what's going on in committee, it gives you a chance to either thank her for, voting on something, or to ask her for her support when something's coming up for a vote. It's a really good way to just keep that conversation going and keeping your organization and your issue top of mind. So we talked about who's on certain social media accounts and who isn't, right? If it's hard to ask your members to do something that you're not using. So I encourage all of you, and I did it myself. I was at a conference about 2 years ago, and I was listening to a lecture just like this, but it was in person, and they were talking about new tools, and the guy was talking about Snapchat, and I'm like, you know what? I don't know. That's like a thing for kids. I don't want to use that. And basically what he said was, he goes, people are using it. It's not going away. Sign up for an account, get familiar with it. You don't have to use it as your primary means of communication, but you do have to have a working knowledge of it. So believe it or not, I signed up for Snapchat. I figured out how the filters work. I don't use it very much because honestly, in my age group, most of my friends aren't using it. And if I was using it with kids, I'd probably be in trouble. But I encourage you, embrace new technology. Please, please, please. It's not going to go away. Sign up for it, even if you only use it as to follow other people and see what they're saying, and then just occasionally dip your toe in the water. Sign up for a Twitter account, sign up for an Instagram account, sign up for Snapchat, TikTok. Just it's something to play around with while you're watching the news and it's on in the background.
And the more familiar you become with other platforms, it just makes it that much easier to figure out what's new on Facebook or what's new on Instagram once things, because things change all the time. And it just makes it easier for you to navigate all of everything.
Yeah. So then again, if you're the head of the organization, you have a comms person that run your social media channels, I really, really encourage you, as whether you're the executive director or the president, to familiarize yourself with your social media accounts, because there may come a day where something is happening urgently and your comms person is sick or on vacation, and you don't want to have to be trying to figure all these things out under an emergency or crisis situation. I highly, highly encourage you. And also as the head of an organization, it helps you understand how your members are engaging with it. It's really important to be involved with that aspect of it. And it also allows you to, engage with it yourself, and really would encourage you to, develop your own profile and your own social media accounts. I really want to get to the metrics, and we're really getting tight on time here. So we talked about developing a plan for managing your tools. One thing we've done, you can do it old school. You can create a spreadsheet, really, and just say, these are the tweets I'm going to put out, or the Instagram messages I'm going to put out. Here's the graphic, here's the day, here's the content. Or you can use tools like Hootsuite, or Sharice, do you want to talk about any of those tools that help kind of schedule them ahead of time and put them out?
I've had great experience with Hootsuite, and actually I know Facebook, right on the Facebook page, you can schedule now. I think that's been there for a little bit. But Hootsuite's the one that I've had the most experience with, and I would recommend using that one. But if you're able to do it live too, I mean, that's always works really well too.
Yeah, it just helps you schedule them in advance, because that way you don't have to be, putting out various messages on social media if you're doing something on the weekend. It just goes automatically. If
you're not familiar with any of the scheduling platforms that they have, YouTube's the best. I YouTube everything that I don't know how to do. So I'm sure you can find a how-to on there that'll just walk you through it real quick if you are interested in using one of those.
Yep. So, use your tools to monitor these things. I want to jump right ahead to the metrics. So with metrics, what you're going to want to do is you want to be able to go back and look at, and it becomes kind of a game. I really like to look at, from month to month, quarter to quarter, how am I improving? Do I have more followers? Am I getting more engagement? And what posts have done the best? I'll tell you really quickly, when I was at the Dental Association, we were really trying hard to get our members engaged with social media. We were putting out great content about CE and about our legislation, things that were really important to them. And then one day, it was like National Veterinary Dentist Day, right? Who knew there was such a thing? And we put up a photo of a veterinary dentist at the National Zoo like brushing the teeth of like a walrus. And oh my God, it almost broke the internet. We had so many likes, so many shares, so many engagements, like anything with animals. If you want to get some people's attention, put a serious message with a picture of an animal. Like it sounds totally corny, but it really works. But what that got us to do was recognize that our audience, while they're seeing the content and they're getting it, the way we also need to not be so serious all the time and give them something. You can't just eat vegetables every single day. Once in a while, you need a treat. So on Fridays, we would give them, our like Puppy Friday or Kitten Friday, like something relevant to the profession that was relevant, like Veterinary Dentist Day, but also was a little irreverent and showed that we had a sense of humor. That's one of my important takeaways too, is that, have fun with this. It doesn't have to be serious all the time. People, we're all real people and we should let a little bit of our personality come through. So even though we're doing serious things, you can be a little irreverent at times. So that's one thing.
It helps you stand out from the crowd.
Yeah.
So
So
it makes it memorable.
again, sorry we rushed through some of this because we just got short on time. In the end, this can feel like a lot and it can feel overwhelming. But just remember that, if you create a plan and you stick to your plan and you have good measurable objectives and you're tracking your metrics, it all works. And even though it doesn't sometimes seem like it does, when you look back on it in totality and you see, wow, I had 1 million impressions and I had 10,000 engagements and I grew my followers by 1,200. That's really overwhelming when you look at it at the end of a campaign. So in the day-to-day, it can feel sometimes a little pointless, like you're talking to nobody. But then every once in a while, you'll get one of those things that makes it all worthwhile. Or your members a board member will tell you, like, man, that's really good what you're putting out there. You guys are doing really high quality work. So I would say, stick to your message, stick to your plan, and monitor your metrics, and you'll have good success. Any parting thoughts on that, Sharice?
No, I think you nailed it right there. Yep. And of course, if you have follow-up questions, because I know we are out of time, feel free to reach out to both of us. I think we can probably just shoot our email in this chat.
Yeah, just share your email in the chat. That would be great. And we'll share that out with everybody after this event as well.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you both to Josh and Sharice for being part of today's presentation. I really appreciate it. It's been a great day. We're going to wrap up. Thank you for being here. And just a reminder, our current normal is really different from what it was 2 weeks ago. And I just saw a message on Facebook the other day from my good friend, Jim Spellos, who shared a great tip that during this time of what we're now sort of isolation, take time to do one thing for yourself and take time to do one thing for someone else. Reconnect with your colleagues and your friends and check in with each other, because we're all going to be struggling to get by because of this kind of disconnect from not being able to meet in person. We are all in this together, and SA continues to work on your behalf during this really difficult time. So thank you again for joining us. The sessions, as I mentioned before, will be recorded. We will share those out at the end of the series, along with the PowerPoint presentations that we'll make available. And mark your calendars, because April 1st and April 8th will be the next 2 hour-long sessions for this series. So thank you and have a great weekend. And I look forward to seeing your faces on April 1st.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Yeah.